Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Tonight we're back here with the company fails, and tonight we got the top 10 worst Capcom fails. Yep, from Street Fighter to Mega Man, these guys have been through it all. He's actually getting some help tonight with TheQuarterGuy. Whew. Man, he really screwed up. So I'm guessing Josh brought in TheQuarterGuy because I guess he had more experience with them? I don't know. Anywho, so let's take a look back at the Capcom fails and we'll see how things went. So be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's go. Let's go. Interesting. There's a lot of franchises under their belts. I'm up on her?
Capcom. Back in the day, Capcom and Konami were as beloved as Coke and Pepsi. Then, like most modern companies, Capcom's had a bit of a dark period, which descended into them being almost as hated as Konami. But unlike Konami, they've managed to skate by most of the controversy, and in recent days, they've entered something of a renaissance, churning out hit after hit after hit after hit.
That being said, it's important not to forget their more dubious actions.
And there's
those
TheQuarterGuy.
who fail to learn from history are doomed to
repeat it.
And from one gamer to another, there are many things that Capcom has done that we don't want to see repeated.
What are you doing here?
I let myself in.
Hey, man.
Okay.
So today,
okay.
I and my guest and resident Capcom fanboy, TheQuarterGuy, will be counting the top 10 Capcom fails for your viewing pleasure.
Both Josh
should
and
be
I
good.
have quite a bit of experience with various Capcom franchises, some of which are different between us. So when a company that puts out games that we both love screws up the way Capcom has, we sure as heck take notice.
Get your weapons ready.
Fucking ready to go. Chest in case. Let's go. Number 10.
DLC has been both a blessing and a curse. The curse being that it's regularly exploited by companies to sell people parts of a completed game at ludicrous prices. But
Sounds
at the
right.
same time, it's allowed games to quickly deliver patches or balancing, the service is convenient, and you don't have to release 10 billion versions of the same game because someone thinks Meta Knight is too OP.
Probably the most infamous case of that last instance
Oh,
is
yeah,
the
Street
myriad
Fighter.
versions of Street Fighter 2. Now, don't get us wrong,
No
Street
kidding.
Fighter 2 is not only an astronomical improvement over the archaic and forgotten original, but it practically put traditional fighting games on the map and codified some of the traditions of the genre. Some of them by accident.
As you see.
And then they made Champion Edition, which made
Edition.
the bosses playable and gave us mirror matches.
Then in the same year, we had Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting, which featured faster playing speed, a few new moves, and some palette swaps. Then a year later, there was Super Street Fighter 2, which added 4 new characters and more special moves. Then a year later, we had Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which tweaked some characters and
4.
added super combos and Akuma. Then there was Hyper Street Fighter 2. Then Super
5.
Turbo HD Remix. Jeez, Skyrim's bazillion
6
versions.
now,
I'm
I
looking at
think.
this and laughing.
Look, we get it. Street Fighter 2 is a beloved and influential mark in video game history. We just don't need to be reminded of it every few
Yeah,
years.
no kidding.
Nowadays,
Don't
in
hit
our
us over the
advent
heads.
age of DLC, this re-releasing business won't
Yeah,
exactly
thank
fly
God.
with consumers unless something drastic happened that rendered it necessary. At
True.
least in the case of Street Fighter 4, every release after Super was released both as an update and a standalone for those who didn't have the previous version.
See?
Same with Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition, but that's another story. He's Street
Yep.
Fighter 2, he's Street Fighter 2, you're Street Fighter 2, I'm Street Fighter 2! Are there any other
SpongeBob
Street
Mop.
Fighter 2s I should know about?
Here comes a new challenger!
So 7 now.
I'm outta here.
We're out of here. 9 coming up.
Internet connections aren't always reliable. Crashes, lag, downtime, it's a pain, especially if you happen to
True.
be deployed military in a
Oh.
nuclear submarine. Boy, am I never gonna
You
let
didn't
that
mention-
one go.
You're doing Microsoft fails later, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've already touched on this
Don't worry,
in the
we got
Sony
that.
fails segment and criticized EA
Which
for the
was
same
last
thing,
episode.
but I'm nothing if not an equal opportunity critic of gaming companies.
Here you
Why not?
are all equally worthless.
Yep, Capcom is a two-time offender in this regard. The first incident happened in 2010 with the release of
Oh,
Final Fight
Final
Double
Fight.
Impact. a 2-pack
Okay.
containing the original Final Fight and another Capcom arcade classic called Magic Sword. As it turns out,
Okay,
Capcom
weird.
saw the rise of so-called PS3 sharing as a threat, and did something rather underhanded about it. If a PS3 user lost their connection to PSN while playing the game, they would be in for a nasty surprise.
That's an
Oh.
odd way of saying they weren't allowed to play the game. And they did it again
Yeah,
less than a year later with Bionic Commando Rearmed 2. People were really excited to not be able to play their recently purchased, tonally appropriate reboot
Yeesh.
because of the PSN hack. Oh, the vicious cycle of DRM and piracy.
iTunes figured out how to combat piracy ages ago. Just
no
be a better
kidding.
service. Be smart about
See?
your distribution, and don't inconvenience the average gamer for the sake of a few
Yeah,
criminals
'cause they
who
will
continue
hack
find
to
ways
get off
around your
those
protection
onlines.
measures
Like, sheesh.
regardless.
Like, don't give them a reason to hack it. They'll not. They won't. Okay? Yeesh.
But that's another story.
I love tie-ins.
Who wants
Street
to hear a
Fighter
story?
5.
Oh man, are we getting into some rich stuff now? In 2014, at the PlayStation Experience, the newest entry in the
What?
Street Fighter series was unveiled to be in development for PC and PlayStation 4, and Capcom hyped the living daylights out of it. They even offered a beta program for Street Fighter V in the summer of 2015 for players who pre-ordered the game. That's
I think I know what
where
happened
the
here.
Problems began.
So many companies fail to realize the impact of their franchises' names when it comes to online play. Blizzard with Diablo, EA with SimCity, and who else but Capcom,
Capcom with
with
Street Fighter 5.
People could not play the beta because of ridiculous traffic, so much that they had to take it offline and
oops.
perform a stress test, which took a few weeks. Not terrible,
You
but
think they would've
certainly a
shown
bad
that
omen for when the
beforehand?
game finally came out, and oh boy.
Street Fighter V at launch was a wreck.
Oh, boy.
Not only were there still server issues after the beta, but the initial game was severely lacking. There was very little single-player content, the process of grinding fight money was long if you didn't want to pay real money for the DLC, and PS4
Word.
users became aware of input delay that was as high as 8 frames. That
Hey,
might not
8
seem
frames?
like much to the average player, but for the competitive scene, this was a huge problem.
With the heavy focus on
No
the
kidding.
Capcom Fighter Network and axing of good single player, it was clear early on that Capcom was trying to push Street Fighter V as an esport. But they forgot that games need to be complete games first. You know, build a passionate community, then they become esports. The story mode and season DLC did little to help, and longtime fans didn't even get a proper arcade mode until 2 years after launch.
You know the launch of a game reeks of tone deafness when the updated version of the game feels more like it should have to begin with. But even with the addition of a huge arcade mode and several beloved characters, you can still tell that Capcom was going in hard on the esports scene with the Capcom Pro Tour DLC each year. Especially recently, when they were posting ads in the game during the tour.
Oof.
This is the kind of
Seriously?
shilling we save for free-to-play mobile games, not full retail releases.
In-game ads? Really? You spend with mobile games? Yeah, would you? What? Who does that? And also, like I always say, like when success comes a knocking, people just tend to forget the checks. They just let things get to their heads. Ugh. Anyway, moving on. Number 7.
This one has its origins back in the era of the GameCube and the Capcom
Okay.
5, a set of 5 games that were slated to be exclusives for the console. While Beautiful Joe did get some love, the one that had the most success by far was Resident Evil 4. This was a game that took a decidedly
So,
different turn from
what
the
happened?
previously survival horror-focused franchise in
Wait,
a direction
act-
that skewed more towards
Oh
action.
wait, I think I
Now,
remember what
action
this
and
went.
horror can work together if Resident Evil 4
If
is any
played right.
indication. Heck, any good writer can tell you that horror and comedy are strange bedfellows. But the
True.
success was misinterpreted,
Like
and the
tragedy and
franchise
comedy.
slowly became more and more
What?
action-oriented and seemed less like the
What?
horror franchise people
What?
loved. Enter Resident Evil 6. To start off
There
this
it is.
cavalcade of crap, this
Oh.
professed horror
Mm.
game felt it needed a poorly implemented cover system with an unforgivable camera. My
Really?
Pavlovian reservations aside, isn't this sort of mechanic
boy.
usually reserved for a tactical action game, not a horror
Yeah.
game? And we're just getting started.
Now, a franchise undergoing a tonal shift isn't necessarily bad. Case in point, people loved when the original Devil May Cry stopped taking itself so dang
3.
seriously and let Dante be, well, Dante.
Dante.
But the thing is, in order to pull it off, you have to do something to stand out. Resident Evil 6 doesn't do that.
Not so much.
Opting instead to play it safe and display itself as a generic third-person shooter which, oddly enough, this franchise pioneered and did better before, while wallowing in every action flick trope they could cram into it. You know people actually hated the Resident Evil movies, right? You weren't supposed to copy them!
And it
What the hell,
abuses
guys?
video game tropes it pioneered as well. The game is ridden with all these stick-wagging and button-mashing quick-time events, whereas in Resident Evil 4, they were spaced out, which gave them more tension and dread. Okay, mostly. The co-op puzzles require no cooperation or just exclude one player entirely. This was done better in earlier games. With all the ridiculous linear action set pieces, sequences ending in explosions, horrible story pacing, and boring characters, you might as well have slapped directed by Michael Bay.
And Michael
on the
Bay
cover.
there.
This game was such
It
a bad
does feel
look
like
for
a
the
Michael Bay
franchise
movie.
that even Capcom themselves realized they screwed up big time. Even worse, that it managed to sell nearly 5 million copies and was still deemed a failure. For some reason. Which
We'll
is
see that
probably
later.
why they went back to the series' survival horror roots in Resident Evil 7.
Yeah, with
much
the
to
better
applause
one.
of fans of the series. And this year, Capcom released a remake of Resident Evil 2, which was a resounding critical and financial success. In a time
Thank
where
God.
cheap horror games are a dime a dozen, I figure Capcom realized they had to look back at how they brought the genre into the limelight in the first place.
Until 2019, but hindsight's 2020, I guess.
Oh sure, that's accidental.
No kidding. Oof. Poor Resident Evil. They got shafted that day. Oof. Number 6?
Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was a beloved arcade
Oh,
game.
I
and
think
people
I know
were
which game
itching
this one
for a
is.
sequel. We eventually got one with
Infinite?
Marvel vs. Capcom 3. An alright game, but didn't quite make the splash that 2 did, and that's mainly due to the considerably
Oh, yeah,
smaller
the
roster.
lack.
There were a few characters that didn't make the cut and were going to be
DC.
DLC, but the 2011 earthquake forced them to release Ultimate to recoup expenses. Given the circumstances, we
Fair
can
enough.
totally understand.
Flash forward to the PlayStation experience of 2016,
There it is.
where we were greeted
Infinite.
by a trailer featuring none other than my boy X alongside Ryu duking it out with Iron Man and Captain Marvel. And there were Infinity Stones. The crowd was pumped as their hopes and dreams were realized. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was bringing the beloved crossover out of retirement. If only we knew the
We
rocky
knew.
road that lay ahead of us.
The game somehow had even fewer characters than Marvel vs. Capcom 3, meaning it was
fewer.
only the MCU characters. This
We
was
only
due to
had 2.
Disney now having the rights for Marvel characters, and they went a little process. There's also a huge
Thanks a
PR
lot, Disney.
disaster about the roster and trying to defend it as characters just being functions, giving Ultron some of Magneto's iconic moveset, for example. That's like
Dude.
taking out Luigi in Smash, throwing in Fawful, and giving him the negative zone attack.
I wouldn't mind that.
No one
Now,
asked you.
you.
Another issue with the game became apparent as the trailers came out leading up to the game's release.
Oh boy.
The game's production values were sorely lacking. Poorly rendered character models, bad voice direction, janky animations, the game was looking completely lackluster in presentation, which
this
is
is not-
especially egregious considering the series' lineage. This was not helping the game, especially since they were going in big with the cinematic story mode, which honestly was looking more and more like a bad fanfic with every trailer.
So, with all this cut
kidding.
content and cut corners to cut costs, you'd think Capcom would try to give people a little more to make up for it. Absolutely. Here's a very generous $30 for 6 characters, including half the main villain. You know what's really telling that this was a cash grab when BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, which had 20 DLC characters in its first season, still costs less money for characters than Infinite did. It's a real shame
no
because
kidding.
despite all these snafus, the gameplay was really good. But one good apple isn't enough to save the barrel.
Also,
And too
the
bad.
Infinity Eggs. Never forget the Infinity Eggs.
Yeah, Infinite got like shafted in that game. Oof.
Oh,
Next.
the decade of 2000 was a dark time.
Oh, Persia?
By that, I mean
Oh, the
everything
edge.
was trying to be darker and edgier. Some successes, many, many failures. We're gonna talk about this one. How
Oh,
did we go from
fight.
an NES classic that found a place in Capcom's Hall of Fame to this crap?
Let's start off at the character design. We have a dramatic shift from a goofy 80s cop art style to a dreary, humorless mess. Some guys can pull off dreadlocks. This boy cannot.
guy could not.
Gone is the sly and witty Nathan Rad Spencer, and in his place is this brooding, suffering personality who can't stop saying fuck because he's a real man. And his silly bionic
boy.
arm also has a dark, gritty backstory. It's his wife. I
Oh.
shit you not.
And we haven't even
Seriously?
gotten to the gameplay. How about we start with that fancy schmancy wife arm and all the freedom it supposedly gives you? Yeah, all that freedom with linear level design. Seriously, this game promised players what Spider-Man on PS4 would actually give us 9 years later. Only this reboot failed to deliver, since there are too many restrictions on exploration. Water? Don't try it. It will go exactly as you expect it. Also, there's the slight insignificant matter of deadly radiation all over the place. Yeah, so much freedom.
There's also a problem with frequent load.
Like that?
Loading screens. This is coupled with an incredibly boring combat that Just Cause 2 did better with similar mechanics, bare bones multiplayer that Uncharted does better with similar mechanics, and shameless product placement that Adam Sandler... Okay, to be fair, it's not that bad. But at the end of it all, Bionic Commando 2009's darkness and grittiness isn't even ironically funny. It's just sad. At least we got Rearmed 2, and that was totally playable. Oh.
That game didn't even have multiplayer. What was the point?
Yeah, what the hell? Fish. Man, you gotta feel bad for these guys sometimes.
As stated before, DLC was such a great idea. Being able to download quick fixes and extra content for the convenience of your home without having to completely remake a new version or release an expansion pack on a separate cartridge or disc. That's what it's supposed to do in theory. The reality is a little more annoying, and Capcom is one of the worst offenders of abusing this.
We've already covered how Marvel Infinite charged 30 bucks for 6 characters, but they also kind of went a bit overboard for costumes too, with the costume pass that also sold for 30 bucks. Of course, that's only one game. In Marvel vs. Capcom 3, the 2 characters that actually were DLC instead of being shipped to Ultimate were, again, $5 a pop. One of the biggest offenders, though, was Street Fighter Cross Tekken. While 12 characters for 20 bucks was admittedly much more reasonable in comparison, there was still all the costume packs, and microtransactions for gem packs.
There's also the issue with the DLC. By that I mean disc-locked content. Street Fighter X Tekken and Resident Evil 5 both hid away content behind a paywall that was already on the disc. Resident Evil 5's Versus mode was discovered to be unusually small for DLC, because all they were doing was downloading a patcher key to unlock the mode. Street Fighter X Tekken was even worse, with 12 characters hidden on the disc. Capcom's excuse? It's more efficient and flexible. We apparently already have enough content, so what's wrong with holding some of it back to give it a little more longevity out of your purchase? Also, they were afraid that the DLC would be too much space for your console's hard drives. See? They're just thinking about you.
Bullshit.
You know, sorry, I'm allergic to bullshit.
Speaking of
I think we all see that coming from.
The stupidest use of DLC we've seen from Capcom is in terms of levels. Now, don't get me wrong, additional levels can add more fun to a game, as we've seen in Mega Man 9 and 10. But here's the thing. These were bonus levels. However, what you don't do is hide your true ending behind a paywall, such as the fate that befell Asura's Wrath. Particularly good players got to the end of episode 18 only to be presented with a cliffhanger. How did this cliffhanger get resolved? You originally had to pay $7 to find out. Eventually this was changed to require a whole bunch of S ranks, so at least Capcom seems to have learned from...
That...
You've got to be kidding me. They did it again?
Yep. Yeah, they just really wanted that money. Just money, money, money. Hey, someone had to do it. Yeesh, man. Sometimes you feel like these guys are just grabbing for more money whenever they can. Anywho, alright, final 3, here we go.
Now, there are times when video games, even good ones, end up missing the mark in terms of sales. Bad publicity or marketing, ill-advised release date, or it ended up being overshadowed by other games. In fact, I made a whole countdown about those.
And there is the shameless plug. Bite me.
Not you!
But yeah, a lot of cult classics fit this bill. Beyond Good and Evil, Mad World, Earthbound, even games we regard as masterpieces like Conker's Bad Fur Day were commercial flops.
Now, this can happen to any gaming company, but it tends to hit Capcom more frequently than Genji requesting healing.
Angela, I need healing.
That, coupled with the fact that Capcom at one point had exorbitant requirements for a game to have a sequel, has led to at least a few franchises being left on the cutting room floor. Case in point, in 2014, Yoshinori Ono said in an interview that one requirement for a game to have a sequel was to sell 2 million copies. For many, even selling 1 million is something to be proud of. Now, the interview in question was concerning the Darkstalkers Resurrection collection, But it's not the only game to have such ridiculous expectations.
Other games that have fallen into the sales fail bin include, but are not limited to, Dragon's Dogma, Power Stone, Okami, the aforementioned Marvel Infinite, Monster Hunter Double Cross, Resident Evil 6 and 7, and Dead Rising 4, which eventually led to the closing of Capcom Vancouver. Yikes.
Some of these failures are due to poor marketing, inflated budgets, PR disasters, or whatever the reason. And the sad thing is some of the games that are on this list pulled in sales figures that some other companies would kill to acquire. And yet, Capcom's definition of success was so far above what many other companies would dare to set that what would seem like success to most went down as flops in Capcom's book.
But at least they seem to have eased up a bit. After all, Mega Man 11 sold just under 1 million, and Capcom was happy enough with it that the next game is being implied to be entering pre-production this year. A stark change for the franchise from the previous decade or so.
You know, we've been doing a lot of
That going along. I'm kind of curious now. Mega Man games coming along. Number 2.
Guess who's got 2 thumbs and is gonna talk about overworking employees again?
This guy!
Oi!
Real talk though, this is something that we both take very seriously, and until it gets fixed, we're not gonna shut up about it. Why the gaming industry hasn't unionized yet is beyond me, because these stories just keep popping up. This story from 2012 comes from then lead fighting game producer Yoshiori Ono, known for Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter Cross Tekken. You know it's a bad look when he asks the reporter to have the headline be Capcom overworks Ono.
Capcom refuses to allow any sort of trade union, and if you complain about the work, you're probably going to get sacked. Even if you overwork yourself to the point of hospitalization, you're expected to get right back to work. Not even a hope you're doing well, just hitting the ground running. In fact, you'll probably be required to travel to Rome for marketing.
I hope she made lots of spaghetti!
Ono's also noticed that Capcom employees regularly disappear after finishing a new game, and he suspects it's because they've been worked far too hard. And the day after a game is finished and goes off to manufacture, there are 10 empty desks, their previous occupants never to be seen again. So, Capcom overworked their employees to the point of hospitalization, then fired them. That is a special kind of scummy.
However, what puts this at number 2, unlike other companies, is that this really is the only story we have regarding such mistreatment, and we've had no other stories surface since or before. Either Capcom is just very good at slipping under the radar, or they've since cleaned up their act. Let's hope it's the latter.
Yeah, hopefully.
Brief shout out to Capcom's spotty record with localization. Not really that big of a fail, as many of the anachronisms become funny. Of course, better to have hilariously bad localization than none at all. Ace Attorney and Sengoku Basara fans can relate.
Here we go. Number 1.
Remember that one Smash Bros. Invitational? Mega Man's Final Smash hadn't been fully revealed yet, but that didn't stop Nintendo from including him in the demo. Who should grab the Smash Ball but Mega Man? Just listen to this reaction.
There you go.
It's so beautiful.
That was not the reaction of a fan base that doesn't care. Mega Man clearly has a very passionate and dedicated following that loves the giant world of Reploids, Net Navis, and super fighting robots. So to see it get mistreated so frequently is upsetting, even as someone who's not a fan.
Still hurts.
Need a hug?
After all this time, it still hurts.
How about I start in 2001 with Mega Man X5? Longtime series character designer turned producer Keiji Inafune had originally intended for X5 to be the end of the X series. Unfortunately, Capcom didn't appreciate a cash cow being put out to pasture, so they made X6 behind his back in less than a year. Now, I personally consider X6 to be a guilty pleasure, but it's clearly a rush job, and at times it even feels like a game that was made out of spite for Inafune. Not to mention, it forced him to change his original vision for Mega Man Zero. And X7? People who follow me know how I feel about that train wreck. It was my Patreon milestone video.
And there's
your self-plug.
Hey, now we're even.
How about we talk about the frightening amount of canceled games starring the Blue Bomber? When Mega Man Legends 3 was announced in October of 2010, fans were hyped. Inafune had left Capcom during development, but they trudged on. In fact, in a later interview, it was stated to be almost done. But in July of 2011, it just died. And sifting through these poorly worded tweets that accidentally placed blame on fans, it's still unclear
Really?
as to why this game was ultimately canned. The fan backlash
Well,
was
guys.
enormous, spawning petitions and even an angry musical number. Suffice to say, it was a PR disaster.
In the same time period, we had another Mega Man game with a ton of promise get sent prematurely to the scrap heap. In July of 2010, a teaser was shown for Mega Man Universe, a game later revealed to be based on user-created levels and even customizable characters. Kind of like
Just
what
like
Super
Mario
Mario
Maker.
Maker would do years
Just
later.
minus the character
Even Ryu from
customization.
Street Fighter and Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins were getting in on the act. But like Legends 3, it got the spike.
And canceled again.
Being canceled in March of
Bro.
2011. There was also going to be an MMO in
Same
Korea,
year, too.
which was announced in June 2010, but canceled in March 2013. And even that's not all.
Man, what's with
It was
2010 to
revealed in
cancel Mega
2013
Man?
that Armature, formed from Retro Studios expats, was working on a dark reboot of Mega Man X, only for that game to be canceled
Yeah.
as well.
It appears that without
Probably for the
Inafune
best.
around, Capcom had no idea what to do with Mega Man. And being unable to exercise his passion, he went on to...
Mighty number 9. Ooh.
I blame Capcom for this. If they weren't such dum-dums, Inafune wouldn't have left and created that hot mess. Now, in recent years, we've gotten some good Capcom games, including Mega Man games.
True.
But we still have a nasty taste in our mouths from the sheer amount of contempt they used to show for their flagship franchise.
Despite the recent relative success of Mega Man 11 and both the Classic and X Legacy collections, which paint a hopeful
True.
future for the franchise, it still really hurts when you think about what could have been. Mistreating your employees is already bad enough, but when you mistreat your employees, your fans, and your legacy in such a short span of time, it takes a
Yeah,
lot to regain
not
the
cool.
trust of gamers after that. Let's hope their recent successes don't go to their heads, or we could end up with something like this again.
I'm the fiery Joker.
I'm the quarter guy.
You can leave now.
And yeah, let's be honest, like, sorry, but there is the Battle Network Legacy Collection coming out too, which is going to be featuring all of them, so I'm actually hyped about that. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it could be they're just using that to hold down the fort until they can get like the whole games out, but I don't know. Could be. But it's, I mean, heck, all we're missing now is just Star Wars remastered, and we're good to go. You know? Actually, would that even work with the Switch? I'm curious now. Actually, I don't know if we ever had like a lot of the DS games get remastered for the Switch, even though it has like a touchscreen. Right? I don't know. I'm just kind of surprised. Anyway, so there you go. Biggest failures from Capcom is their just treatment of franchises here. So I hope you guys enjoy. Until next time, guys, like, subscribe for more. See ya.